welcome to Around the World in Under 15 Minutes. Today we are going to be talking about current events from all around the world. We have our expert Ben Appleton on religious violence, Kyra Myers on same-sex marriage, and myself, Victoria Whitfield, on marijuana in the United States. So Ben, to start us off today, what is the latest developments concerning the Nigerian terrorist group Boko Haram?
Recently, in Nigeria, terrorist group Boko Haram has started taking efforts to fight the international aid towards removing polio from the northeastern area of Nigeria. We're not really exactly sure why they're so against this. It could just be because it is done by Western nations and Boko Haram despises Western nations. But it's a big problem for Nigeria because Nigeria is one of 3 countries in the world that still has polio. And on top of just being a terrible human rights violation, it also is just a national embarrassment for the country. And yes. On the other side, in Nigeria, local vigilante groups have started to rise up and work with the government. And what's positive about this is that these vigilante groups are not religiously affiliated, but are simply exist to ensure free thought and peace in their respective regions. So they're not going out and necessarily hunting down Boko Haram groups or groups affiliated, but they're working to protect their own villages and local areas and ensure that no one is their right to freedom of religion is being violated.
Kyra, do you see any similarities in the United States with religious violence or any violence going on?
Well, there's been many cases where homosexuals were targeted and became victims of horrible violence from these religious groups, and also the other way around, where a lot of gay rights activists went against religious groups to kind of get back for the controversy.
So with the recent law in Arizona allowing businesses to refuse service to someone based on religious decisions, do you see that affecting the lifestyle of homosexuals in the state?
Well, very much so, because our country went through a huge change when we hit the civil rights movements for African Americans, and there was a lot of segregation and discrimination, and this really mirrors it, which is very interesting that we're going kind of back in history. Okay.
Sorry.
That we're kind of going, we're kind of repeating history, and I think it's a really sad thing that people are denying them service because it's their own personal right to the pursuit of happiness and freedom of religion goes against same-sex marriage. It doesn't mean that they should be able to tell someone else how to live their life because everybody has the freedom of religion and religions believe different things.
So speaking of trying to improve human rights, do you see the recent attempts at legalizing marijuana in more states as a progression towards a more humanistic society?
Yes, I see this as a progression for human rights. Not only does it allow people to voice their opinions on the situation, whether they support it or they don't support it, but it also gives aid to medical patients who need it. We saw a couple weeks ago that Minnesota just recently passed a law to allow medical marijuana, but they're only doing it as of right now for patients with seizures and epilepsy, and they're continuing their research on the drug to see whether it would be helpful for any other patients who might benefit from it.
Okay.
Do you think that if marijuana was legalized, that young teens would be less inclined to take part in using the drug because it takes out the thrill of, oh, this is illegal? Because if somebody, even though the age would be 18, if somebody was, okay, I'll cut this part out. For some young teens, they do alcohol or drugs, just do it, okay? They drink alcohol or do drugs because of the thrill of it being illegal, and there's a thrill aspect to it. But do you think that if it was legalized that you would find less activity from young teens?
Just like the repeal of the prohibition of alcohol, when it was brought back into the country, people were drinking it all the time, but now you don't see people abusing alcohol as much as they did when it was first brought back, because that's when it was first legalized. Just like in Colorado, when marijuana was legalized for recreational use in Colorado, you saw swarms of people, and we still see swarms of people going to Colorado to smoke it, to try it, to see how it feels to smoke legally. But I'd say in a few years or so, that's probably going to change completely. But if it starts happening in all the different states, I don't know where to go from
Yeah,
there.
it won't be as cool an experience.
Well, I agree, because it's also kind of like dangling a carrot in somebody's face, saying it's out there, because we all know that marijuana is still out there even though it's not legalized. And it's the same thing like alcohol, even though it's legalized, if teenagers wanted to, they can get their hands on it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's always going to be the case, but I think that you will definitely find a decrease in use when it is legalized.
And now back to the international stage. We have a guest reporter who is currently in Ukraine right now, and he's going to fill us in on the current relationship between Russia and Ukraine and how the whole secession is going to go.
Because right now I am at a host home in the western end of Ukraine in a small town called Yaroslav. So, back to unimportant happenings in Ukraine. Truly, I can honestly say that when I began to cover this whole thing back when there were just riots going on in Kiev, and I say just riots, it's actually gotten to that point where you can say that, but those were wild in their own way, protesters throwing Molotov cocktails into police, just walls of police officers. Protesters driving tractors or driving bulldozers. Yeah, that was it. Bulldozers into a wall of police, and they just sort of stood there and took it, and in the end they lost that. But it's gone from that, it's gone to referendums in Crimea and ultimately being annexed by Russia, and now a lot of other eastern cities are following suit, and that's really where we are today, or really it's where we were yesterday, because today these protesters have seized government buildings, they've stormed military bases, and now they've got weapons, and essentially it's no longer protests or riots or referendums, it is essentially civil war in Russia, or not Russia, in Ukraine, because after the Crimea referendum, Ukraine was, I guess, trying to do some sort of damage control. So today, I guess, or yesterday, they decided that the best way to do that is to fire 150 Hellfire missiles at the administration building in Lugansk, which is an eastern city. So I'm not really criticizing them, because they have, definitely very difficult situation on their hands, being that there's such a myriad of places where this is actually happening, and it's gotten to the point where I don't even know the names of them all. I'm sure to the dismay of some of our more well-read viewers. But yeah, I apologize for that, but it is really overwhelming at some points, because every day there's something new happening, and I'm sure it'll continue to be that way for a while. So I'm going to tune out now. I wish you all a wonderful day, and back to you guys at the studio.
Thank you for watching this week's episode of Around the World in Under 15 Minutes. Please make sure to come back to next week, and we will discuss the aftermath of the sandstorm in Tehran.